The battlefield was a vision of chaos. Dust and smoke filled the air, thickening with every passing second. The sound of explosions echoed in the distance, and the ground trembled with each impact. Soldiers of different species clashed under the burning skies, each fighting for survival in a war that seemed endless. Among the noise and destruction, there stood a lone figure, an alien woman with silver armor, bloodied and bruised, but still standing tall. Her name was Lyra, a fierce warrior from the Valor species, known across the galaxy for their strength and resilience. But today, all of her might seem to be slipping away. Her armor was cracked, and her energy shield flickered weakly, barely holding up against the assault. She had fought bravely, cutting through the enemy lines, but now she was surrounded. Her comrades had fallen, and the rest of her squad had retreated, leaving her to face the enemy alone. Lyra's breath came in shallow gasps. Her vision was blurry, but she could still see the enemy closing in. The soldiers of the Dominion, a ruthless faction bent on domination, were advancing toward her. They had no mercy, and they knew that she was the last line of defense. If she fell, the war was lost for her people. Yet, as much as she tried to stay focused, the pain from her wounds made it hard to keep her footing. In the distance, she saw other Valor soldiers, but none of them were coming to help. They stood at a distance, watching her struggle, too afraid to get close. Some were even retreating. Lyra's heart sank. She had fought alongside them for years, but now, in her time of need, they had abandoned her. She could feel the weight of their fear. They feared the Dominion, and they feared what would happen if they tried to help her. As the enemy closed in, Lyra knew she had only moments before she would be overwhelmed. She gripped her weapon tightly, ready to go down fighting. But deep inside, something stirred. Was this the end? Would she die alone, surrounded by enemies, with no one to stand by her? The answer came when she least expected it. From the shadows of the battlefield, a figure stepped forward, one that Lyra had not seen in the chaos, a human soldier, barely visible beneath the smoke and dust. He had no armor, no special weapon, only the resolve in his eyes. And with that, the true test of her fate began. As Lyra's vision blurred, she saw the human approaching, moving slowly but steadily through the battlefield. His uniform was tattered, stained with blood and dirt from the long fight. His face was grim, but his eyes, those eyes, were filled with something Lyra hadn't expected to see. There was no fear, no hesitation. The enemy forces had already noticed the human soldier's approach. They turned their weapons towards him, aiming with deadly precision. But the human didn't falter. He didn't even slow his pace. His hands gripped a small plasma pistol, a weapon far less powerful than the ones the Dominion soldiers carried. It seemed like a hopeless weapon to face such an overwhelming force. But in that moment, it was all he had. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. Was this some kind of trick? Was he here to finish her off? No, she realized. His movements were too purposeful, too driven. He wasn't here to harm her. He was here to help her. But why? She had never seen a human fight for the Valor, let alone one who would risk his life for her. A mere alien warrior who was barely hanging on to life. Her thoughts were interrupted when the first Dominion soldier fired. The blast hit the ground near the human, sending dust and debris flying. Yet the human didn't flinch. He dodged the blast with impressive speed, closing the distance between himself and Lyra with every step. She could see the determination in his eyes now. He was committed. He was not turning back. "Get down," he shouted at her, his voice harsh but filled with urgency. Lyra, stunned by his boldness, didn't react immediately. But the human was already there, pulling her toward the ground just as another round of fire zipped overhead. The blast hit the stone behind them, creating a shockwave that rattled her bones. "Why are you helping me?" Lyra managed to gasp, her voice weak and filled with disbelief. She had seen so many leave her behind in battle. The idea that a human would choose to fight for her was beyond anything she had ever imagined. The human glanced down at her, his expression hard but somehow compassionate. "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied with a firm resolve. "No one deserves to die alone on this battlefield. Not you, not anyone." Lyra stared at him, still not fully understanding. He was willing to die for someone he didn't know, someone who wasn't even his species. He was risking everything on a battlefield filled with enemies who would stop at nothing to crush them. But what drove him? What could possibly make him take such a dangerous risk? The human grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. "We don't have much time. I can't protect you forever, but I'll give you a chance to fight back." Before Lyra could respond, the ground shook again as a new group of Dominion soldiers arrived. Their weapons were drawn, and they seemed more determined than ever to wipe out every last Valar resistance. The human didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, positioning himself in front of her. "This is the moment," he muttered under his breath, raising his pistol. "We fight together, or we die here. I'm not leaving you." As Lyra took in the human's words, something shifted inside her. Her fear, her pain, her sense of being abandoned, they all faded. The strength that had been buried beneath the weight of her isolation started to rise. This human wasn't just fighting for her. He was giving her the courage to fight again. With a deep breath, Lyra reached for her weapon, her pulse racing. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, she didn't feel completely alone. Together, they would stand against the Dominion. But would it be enough? Lyra's mind raced as the human soldier pushed her behind cover, his body a shield between her and the oncoming fire. She couldn't believe what was happening. There, in the heat of the battle, this human had risked everything to save her. But was it a fluke? Could she truly trust him? The Dominion soldiers didn't waste time. They spread out, surrounding the two of them on all sides, their weapons aimed with deadly precision. Lyra's fingers tightened around the hilt of her weapon, but the human soldier had already taken action. With a swift movement, he pulled a grenade from his belt, a small but powerful device, designed to create a burst of smoke and confusion. He pulled the pin, tossing it into the center of the enemy's formation. The explosion of smoke and sound was deafening, filling the air with confusion. Lyra's eyes widened in surprise. This human wasn't just reckless, he was calculated. He moved with precision, using the chaos to reposition and catch the Dominion soldiers off guard. Lyra watched in awe as he skillfully took out two enemy soldiers with swift, calculated shots, his movements fluid and effective. She had seen soldiers, both alien and human, in battle before, but this human's efficiency was unlike anything she had ever expected. He was more than just a soldier. He was a survivor, someone who understood the rules of war. As the smoke began to clear, Lyra could feel her own resolve hardening. This was no time for hesitation. She couldn't afford to doubt this human anymore. She had to fight beside him. She had to believe in this unexpected alliance if she wanted to live. "We need to keep moving," the human soldier said, turning toward her. His eyes were sharp, assessing their surroundings with the same focus he had shown in the heat of battle. "The longer we stay here, the more likely they'll trap us." Lyra nodded, wiping the sweat from her forehead. She could see it now. This human was capable. More capable than some of her own kind, perhaps, but that didn't mean she was ready to fully trust him. She couldn't afford to. Her people had been betrayed before. She moved out from behind the cover, her weapon raised as she opened fire on the approaching soldiers. The human moved with her, his every action syncing with hers. It was as if they had fought together for years, the way they anticipated each other's movements. She couldn't help but feel a flicker of admiration for him. His fearlessness, his willingness to risk everything. It was unlike anything she had seen from the Valar warriors. Just as Lyra thought they were gaining ground, the sky darkened. An enormous warship from the Dominion appeared overhead, casting a shadow over the battlefield. The ship was massive, its weapons capable of wiping out entire armies in a single strike, and it was headed straight for them. "Damn," the human muttered under his breath, his gaze flicking between the ship and Lyra. "We've got company. We need to take out that ship, or we're finished." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. The odds were stacked against them. How could they possibly take on a warship with just the two of them? But the human's determination never wavered. "We're not dying here," he said, his voice low but fierce. "We fight." With that, he started to sprint toward the ship's landing zone, dodging fire and taking cover behind craters and rocks. Lyra hesitated for a moment. This was insane. No one could take down a warship with just two soldiers, but there was something in his eyes that made her hesitate no longer. "I'll follow you," Lyra said, her voice steady now. She understood the stakes, and if this human was leading the charge, then she would follow. There was no other choice. They sprinted together, weaving through the battlefield, staying low to avoid enemy fire. The warship's guns began to charge, ready to fire. The world around them felt like it was collapsing. The ground shook as explosions rocked the area. Yet through it all, the human kept his focus, his eyes locked on the target. They reached a cliff's edge, the perfect vantage point for a strike. The human soldier quickly set up a device, a makeshift missile launcher. Lyra could see the effort and precision with which he worked. He had no room for mistakes. He looked at her, a fierce smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Cover me. I need a clear shot." Lyra nodded, positioning herself to provide the cover he needed. As she opened fire on the incoming Dominion soldiers, she could hear the hum of the missile launcher charging. The human aimed carefully, his breathing slow and deliberate. Then, with a final steadying breath, he fired. The missile shot toward the warship with deadly precision, colliding with the ship's weak spot. A massive explosion erupted, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The warship, disabled and burning, began to plummet toward the ground. Lyra watched in awe. They had done it. Against all odds, the human had taken down a warship. But even as the Dominion forces staggered from the shock of the explosion, Lyra knew this wasn't over. The battle was just beginning. The explosion from the warship's destruction had sent shockwaves across the battlefield. Lyra could feel the ground tremble beneath her feet as the massive ship crashed to the earth in a fiery inferno. The Dominion forces were thrown into disarray, their attention momentarily diverted by the chaos. It was their chance to push forward. But the battle was far from won. Lyra and the human soldier wasted no time. They moved quickly, weaving through the rubble and destruction, staying low to avoid the incoming fire. The human had proven himself capable beyond her expectations, but she could see the toll the battle was taking on him. His movements were becoming slower, more labored. Blood stained his uniform, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Are you okay?" Lyra asked, her voice softer than she intended. It was a question she hadn't asked before, not even of her own people. But there was something about this human, a strength, a resolve, that made her care more than she had allowed herself to in a long time. The human soldier didn't answer immediately. He simply nodded, his jaw set in determination. "I'm fine. Just keep moving." But Lyra could see it. His hand trembled as he reloaded his pistol. His breath came in ragged gasps. He was pushing himself to the limit. It wasn't just the physical wounds. The mental strain of the battle was wearing him down. They had already fought for hours, and now the Dominion forces were regrouping. They were not done yet. Suddenly, a blast from a nearby enemy tank sent a shockwave through the ground. Lyra ducked behind a large chunk of debris, her heart racing. The human soldier joined her, his face grim. "They're getting smarter," he muttered, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "We need to find higher ground, or we won't make it." Lyra agreed. They were too exposed, but she didn't want to leave him behind. Every moment felt like an eternity, the weight of their survival pressing heavily on her shoulders. "We can't stay here," Lyra said. "We need a plan." The human turned to her, his eyes sharp. "We don't have time for a perfect plan. We just have to keep moving, take out what we can, and find a way out." She hesitated for a moment, the thought of running crossing her mind. She had always fought to the bitter end, but this time was different. She was no longer alone. This human had given her something she hadn't had in a long time. Hope. But was it enough? Before she could respond, the ground shook again. This time, the vibrations were followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. A new threat had arrived. An enormous Dominion mech, its glowing red eyes scanning the battlefield for any survivors. The human soldier looked at Lyra, his expression determined but with a hint of concern. "We need to stop that thing, or we're finished." Lyra's heart pounded. She had faced mechs before, but never one this large. The machine was heavily armored, its weapons capable of obliterating everything in its path. They didn't have the firepower to take it down head-on. "We'll have to outsmart it," Lyra said, her mind racing. "We can't beat it in a straight fight, but we can use the terrain to our advantage. Follow my lead." Without waiting for a response, Lyra sprinted toward a narrow canyon, hoping to use the natural cover to block the mech's line of sight. The human followed, never questioning her. They had fought together long enough now that their trust in each other was almost unspoken. The mech followed them, its heavy footsteps booming, but the narrow canyon walls limited its mobility. Lyra and the human found a precarious position behind a large boulder, watching as the mech advanced. The human was breathing heavily, but he didn't complain. His eyes were focused, his mind working quickly as he scanned the mech for weak points. "We need to time this perfectly," the human said, his voice steady despite the pressure. "If we miss, it's over." Lyra nodded. She could see the vulnerable spots, around the joints, where the armor was weaker. But getting close enough to strike was another story. The mech stomped closer, its weapons primed. Lyra's heart raced, but she pushed her fear aside. Now wasn't the time to hesitate. She glanced at the human, who gave her a quick nod, signaling that he was ready. As the mech raised its gun, preparing to fire, Lyra and the human made their move. They dashed out from behind the cover, moving with precision, a perfectly synchronized attack. Lyra fired first, aiming for the mech's knee joint, while the human fired at its exposed back. The shots struck true. The mech staggered, its systems glitching as it lost its balance. The ground shook with the force of its fall, and for a moment, everything was still. But that moment didn't last long. The mech was far from finished. It began to rise again, its armor smoking and sparking. "We need to finish this now," Lyra said, her voice tight with urgency. But even as she spoke, she knew the odds were against them. The human soldier's breathing was labored, his strength waning with each passing second. Lyra knew they couldn't keep this up much longer. But in that moment, she also knew something else. They had a chance. Together, they could survive this. But at what cost? Lyra and the human soldier were surrounded by the smoke of battle, their senses alert to every movement. The mech had fallen, but its presence still loomed over them. Both knew the danger wasn't over yet. They had managed to disable the massive machine, but it was only a matter of time before more enemy forces arrived. The human soldier's breathing was ragged, and Lyra could feel the weight of their survival pressing on her shoulders. She had seen countless battles, but this one was different. With each passing minute, she felt more connected to this human, this soldier who had risked his life for her without hesitation. They quickly moved to a nearby ridge, hoping to gain the high ground and strategize. The battlefield around them was littered with the wreckage of enemy vehicles and fallen soldiers. The once bustling battlefield was now eerily silent, as both sides regrouped and prepared for the next wave. The human soldier was no longer as quick on his feet, his exhaustion evident in every step. He didn't complain, though. His focus remained on the task at hand: survival. Lyra couldn't help but respect that. She had fought alongside many in her time, but no one had ever displayed the same determination he had. As they moved cautiously through the wreckage, Lyra noticed something unusual, an unexpected silence from the enemy. It was as if they were waiting for something, preparing for a final strike. Her instincts told her this was a trap. The Dominion was known for their cunning tactics, and this could very well be their last chance to finish them off. She turned to the human soldier, her eyes narrowing. "We need to move. The longer we stay here, the more likely we'll be caught." He nodded, his expression hardening. "Where to?" Lyra scanned the horizon. The only path left was a narrow canyon on the far side of the battlefield. It was risky, but it was their best option. She motioned for the soldier to follow her. "This way. We take the canyon and move quickly. It's our only shot." They began their trek toward the canyon, hearts pounding, aware that the next few minutes could decide their fate. The human soldier stumbled once, but Lyra caught his arm, steadying him. Without a word, they pressed on, the canyon growing closer with each step. The sense of urgency was palpable. There was no turning back now. They were in this together, and they would face whatever came next side by side. The canyon loomed ahead, its narrow walls offering some hope of cover, but also a deep sense of vulnerability. As Lyra and the human soldier made their way toward the entrance, they could feel the tension rising. The enemy was likely aware of their movements, and the silence that had settled over the battlefield could mean that the Dominion was closing in, preparing for one final strike. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and burnt metal, and Lyra's senses were heightened. She kept her weapon ready, eyes scanning every shadow for potential threats. The human soldier, though exhausted, moved with purpose, never hesitating or slowing down. He glanced over at Lyra, his face grim but determined. "We need to find cover once we get inside," he said, his voice low but clear. "It's not over yet." Lyra didn't need to be told twice. She understood the stakes. The canyon might offer protection, but it also trapped them in a narrow space. If they weren't careful, they could be cornered. She pushed forward, every step calculated, her instincts guiding her as they entered the canyon's mouth. The walls of the canyon towered above them, casting long shadows as the light began to fade. They found a narrow ledge, a small break in the stone where they could hide for a moment and plan their next move. Lyra motioned for the soldier to take cover as she crouched beside him, both of them out of sight for the moment. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing on her chest. The Dominion's forces would be relentless. They needed to act fast. The human soldier checked his ammunition and then looked up at her, his expression serious. "I think they know we're here. We'll need to move quickly." Lyra nodded, her heart beating faster. She had fought many battles, but this was different. There was no room for error. She couldn't afford to lose him now, not after everything they had been through. She had come to rely on his strength, his decisiveness. In this alien world, where betrayal and danger lurked at every turn, this human soldier was the only ally she could count on. Suddenly, the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the canyon. The enemy was closing in. Lyra's pulse quickened. She had to make a decision, fight or flee. If they stayed here, they were sitting ducks. But if they kept moving, they had a chance. She made her choice. "We move now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Together, they rose, moving quickly through the narrow canyon, keeping low, and using every bit of cover they could find. The threat was getting closer, the sound of boots pounding the ground growing louder. But Lyra knew one thing. If they were going to survive, they had to rely on each other. There was no turning back now. They reached the far end of the canyon, but what awaited them wasn't the safety they had hoped for. More Dominion soldiers stood at the exit, their weapons aimed directly at them. Lyra's mind raced. There had to be another way out. There had to be. Without thinking, she turned to the human soldier. "Follow me," she said urgently. She had a plan, but it was risky. Still, they didn't have much of a choice. With a nod, the human soldier followed her lead, and together, they sprinted toward a nearby cliffside, hoping they could find an escape before the soldiers could react. The situation had gone from bad to worse, but they were in this together. And Lyra wasn't about to give up now. Lyra and the human soldier reached the cliffside, their breaths ragged as they glanced at the approaching Dominion forces. Time was running out. The narrow canyon had been their last hope of hiding, but now they were cornered. The cliffs offered no promise of safety, only a sheer drop to the ground below. It was a gamble, a move that could either be their salvation or their doom. Lyra turned to the human, her heart racing. "We have to jump." He looked at her with wide eyes, disbelief crossing his face. "You're insane." There's no time to argue." She cut him off, her voice firm but desperate. "We either make this jump or we don't make it out of here at all. They'll have us cornered if we stay." The human soldier hesitated for only a moment, weighing the risks, then nodded grimly. "All right. I trust you." Without another word, Lyra sprinted toward the edge, her thoughts focused on nothing but the jump ahead. The world around her seemed to slow as she pushed herself forward, her body bracing for the leap. As she soared through the air, the rush of wind filled her ears. Her heart pounded, and for a moment, everything else faded. She focused only on the landing, on the hope that she could land safely on the other side. The ground was approaching quickly, and for a moment, it seemed like the gap might be too wide. But then, she felt her feet connect with the rocky surface, her legs absorbing the shock of the landing. She stumbled but managed to keep her balance. She turned quickly to see if the human soldier had made it. The human was in midair, his face a mask of concentration. He leaped with the same determination Lyra had. His body tensed as he flew toward the edge, and just as he seemed like he might miss the landing, his boots hit the rock with a jarring thud. He fell hard but caught himself, rolling to absorb the impact. Lyra reached out to help him, but he quickly got to his feet, breathing heavily. He looked at her with a small smile. Not bad, for a human. She couldn't help but chuckle, despite the adrenaline still rushing through her veins. "You're lucky you didn't land flat on your back." "We both are," he replied, his voice breathless but with a touch of humor. "Let's just hope we didn't do all this for nothing." Their moment of relief was short-lived, however, as they turned to see that the Dominion soldiers had followed them. From the edge of the cliff, they could see the enemy soldiers scrambling toward the narrow path leading down the side of the cliff. They wouldn't be able to outrun them for long. Lyra didn't waste time. "We keep moving." The canyon they had just escaped from was behind them now, but there were still dangers ahead. The human soldier nodded, his face now set with the same grim determination that Lyra had come to trust. They continued to run, weaving through the jagged rocks, each step bringing them closer to the unknown. They had no idea what lay ahead, whether escape was truly possible, or if they were running straight into another trap. But one thing was certain: they were in this together. Lyra had never relied on anyone like this before, but something about the human soldier's resilience, his willingness to sacrifice everything, made her believe that, somehow, they would make it out. Together, they would face whatever dangers awaited them. And perhaps, just perhaps, they might find a way to turn the tide of this battle, not just for themselves, but for the future of her people as well. As they ran, Lyra couldn't shake the thought that this human soldier might be the key to something much larger than they both realized, something that could change everything. But first, they had to survive.